Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Smith Memorial Lecture and the book launch. The book being The Coastal Fishes of the Kanyakumari, and I am the Deputy CEO of the NRF responsible for National Research Infrastructure Platforms. And these are research infrastructure platforms of a scale largely that cannot be replicated throughout our national system of innovation, of concentrated resources, both of a physical and specialist capacity nature. And the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity is one of these national research infrastructures that we call a national research facilities. And we gathered this times for other people across the world who are part of this meeting at this point in time. My job is quite easy, that of welcoming everybody, and I would like to extend a specific welcome to all the people who have auspicious occasion, and but here locally, our regards and recognition of the Department of Science and Innovation. The intention was that Dr. Heemstra, the Director General of the department, support that makes the work of SAIAB, as successful as it is. And so this afternoon, here in some seminal work, the coastal fish. One thing to understand and to underline here is that work of this nature, seminal work of this nature, takes time, and it takes extensive amounts of time, focus, and depth of expertise in terms of what is required for their effort, for the application of their knowledge. And because seminal works of that requiring a large amount of synthesis work, and also understanding that work, while it may be as comprehensive as this one is, it also needs to strike a balance between being as comprehensive as possible, but also as up-to-date as possible. So we will hear just now of the contributions that different in particular, and editor and the editor of volume 1, Dave Ibbett, as well as Peter Nick, leading this flagship research facility that SAIAB is. So I'm not going to go into the detail of the content of the work that is going to be presented today, that we are launching. I'm going to end our keynote speakers to delve into the detail of what it has taken to get us to this point and what the meaning and the significance that are being launched today. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Engels Peterson. Thank you.
Good morning, good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly. It truly is an honor this evening to welcome many of the editors to the Smith Memorial Lecture. We remember the Smiths every year this date. They had a shared birthday, and in September we always have our Smith Memorial Lecture to remember that seminal period in the 30s when the coelacanth was found, and obviously the whole coelacanth story through the decades, resulting in the formation of the J.L.B. Smith Institute of Ichthyology, and subsequently SAIAB, the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity. And we really look back to the Smiths to say a big thanks to setting South Africa on the scene, on the global scene, in terms of ichthyology and fishery science, both marine and freshwater. This evening, we've got a great program to welcome everyone. We've got some of our editors speaking. We're going to be speaking a little bit about, how the book originated. We've got Dr. Samavakis here, who wrote the foreword, but he's also a very key research associate of ours, as well as Dave Ebert, an ex-PhD student of ours, but globally known as the Shark Guy. And of course, Wouter Holleman, who along with Elaine Heemstra really pulled the book together right at the end. So I'm not going to spend too much time. I think many of you who are the audience this evening have a very good idea about the Smiths finding the coelacanth in the 1930s. And that was followed by a subsequent search for another one, which happened after the war, which then resulted in a chair in ichthyology by the CSIR, as well as seminal books on ichthyology. And this book is really part of an illustrious chain of books that have been published. But I don't want to take away from what Wouter Holleman will be speaking this evening. So I will be handing over now to the Department of Science and Innovation, the NRF's parent organization, who have diligently supported us over the decades and provided a lot of input, and of course the vast majority of the finances, which comes into consideration. So I'd like to hand over to Gilbert Siko, and Dr. Gilbert Siko is a very firm friend of SAIAB, and in particular helps with the African coelacanth ecosystem program. So Dr. Siko is not really a guest, he's part of the family, and spends a lot of time here. So I'd like to hand over to Gilbert. He is the director at the Department of Science and Innovation. To Gilbert.
Thank you very much, Gus. I'm standing here today representing the department, particularly our Director General, Dr. Philemon Mujwaha, who unfortunately could not join us today because he also wrote the foreword for this. So, distinguished guests, Dr. Clifford Ngomani, the NRF Deputy CEO and National Research Infrastructure Platforms, Peter Samavakis, Dr. Dave Ebert, Wouter Holleman, and as well as the Program Director, Dr. Anders Peterson. Ladies and gentlemen, the Department of Science and Innovation congratulates the NRF and SAIAB in particular for continuing this excellent work that contributes in ensuring that we upkeep our geographic advantage. We consider this work as important as we have continually made significant and directed investment in the form of infrastructure as well as for capacity development in this area of work. Well, recently in 2019, Cabinet, our South African Cabinet approved the new white paper on science, technology, and innovation, as a long-term policy direction to ensure a growing role for STI in a more prosperous and inclusive society. We will be implementing the white paper through the decadal plan STI, and this current volume of work that we launching today is central in ensuring that South African Institute of Aquatic Biodiversity, the SAIAB, contributes through serving as a unifying force covering the aquatic sciences from pure to applied sciences. Through the decadal plan, we plan to ensure that South Africa becomes a more enabling environment for innovation. We envisage that through committed initiatives where we provide access to infrastructure to a multitude of academic institutions, researchers, as well as students, we will increase our ability to translate research outputs into new products and services. The launch day of this volume, Coastal Fishes of the Western Indian Ocean, also contributes to the other priority of the decadal plan, which is expanding future-proofing of South Africa's human capabilities. South Africa is aquatic environment has a very key economic and social environmental opportunities that are codified in the Global Sustainable Development Goals, our National Development Plan, as well as the medium-term strategic framework. The NRF contributes to national development through its mandate and does this by undertaking activities that would eventually support economic transformation and job creation. SAIAB also plays an important role in the context that sustainable freshwater management and proper marine and spatial planning are essential for the country to develop its oceans economy. Without science-based management, the country will not be able to enhance the benefits of or mitigate the impacts of associated with the sustainable use and development of our aquatic resources. The DSI has committed towards the development of the biodiversity economy and the oceans economy through contributions in Operation Pakisa, which is the implementation plan for the national NDP, National Development Plan. The NRF through SAIAB aims to stimulate, influence, and impact the national aquatic research system so that there is a clear causal relationship between research and innovation and national development within the realm of the aquatic environment. SAIAB activities support the higher education sector in the development of aquatic biodiversity, managers and researchers for the future. From a marine perspective, South Africa forms the southern apex of a major continental mass, flanked by very different marine ecosystems on the east and the west coast, both of which offer different but significant opportunities in terms of developing suitable oceans economy. By virtue of its unique position with regard to both marine and freshwater by geographical boundaries, South Africa is also ideally placed to monitor and document climate change. SAIAB's unique contribution is its ability to provide integrated end-to-end infrastructure at all levels of biodiversity research, as well as innovation from genetics to biology of the individual specimen, and further into the ecosystem that supports those individuals. No other institution in South Africa or Africa has the end-to-end infrastructure capabilities that are available through SAIAB. SAIAB, with broad range of universities and local as well as national government departments concerning the current environmental issues which require the integration of science with the management and provide scientific evidence that policymakers can apply in the formulation of national environmental policy with regards to the water resource management, coastal zone management, marine spatial planning, as well as invasive species management. With this expanding marine science platform managed through the highly innovative community-driven DSI flagship program, the African Ecosystems African Silicon Ecosystems Program, that is ASAP, SAIAB also offers extensive provision for unique and expensive research equipment, and also runs an established marine science transformation program named PUSHISA, offering a specialist equipment and training to provide the next generation of scientists and managers with tools to understand and manage environmental change. The vast and diverse collection of specimens housed at the SAIAB in the National Fish Collection began as one of man's passion for fish and discovery in 1938 of a mysterious bluefish that we all know about, the silicon, that everyone has thought to be extinct. More than 50 years later, SAIAB inception as the JLB Smith Institute in 1968. This collection has developed into a treasure trove of reference material for ethologists all over the world and bears testimony to the work of hundreds of aquatic biologists during the 20th century into the 21st. Coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean follows the fine tradition of producing multi-authored illustrated volumes of fish diversity pioneered by Margaret Smith and Phil Heemstra, with the Smith sea fishes, which gained significant global attention in 1986. Shortly after this, SAIAB at the time JLB Smith Institute of Physiology embarked on a similar but more ambitious long-term project that provided the means of identity to shallow water bodies from tropical and warm temperate waters of the entire Western Indian Ocean. This long-term project generated renewed interest worldwide in the diversity of fishes in the Western Indian Ocean, to the extent that new species of marine fishes from this vast area are still being described almost every month by scientists from Australia, Brazil, Britain, Japan, and elsewhere. Over the years, several taxonomists from other countries have traveled to South Africa to visit SAIAB to work with fish collection with taxonomists based at the Institute. Many of these authors of specialist chapters are specialist chapters in this substantial work. The result of this is the culmination of work of more than 100 authors, photographers, illustrators from 20 countries for many years. This multi-volume publication covers some 3,500 species that occur in waters generally shallower than 200 meters. It includes oceanography of the Western Indian Ocean, the origins of coral reefs, an account of people who laid the foundations of our knowledge of fishes of the Western Indian Ocean, the evolution of bony fishes, maps of these vast oceans, and more. And as such, the DSI once again congratulates the editors and authors who have contributed to this seminal work, which is far more substantial than the Smiths could have imagined at the time. It gives us the great pleasure for the DSI to then officially declare access to the online digital version of this important work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilbert. When the DSI says that they support the NRF and SAIAB, that's no understatement. In the last 10 to 15 years, well, it's ever since the start of the NRF, but in the last 10 to 15 years, Gilbert has diligently ensured that we've been provided with cutting-edge vessels, cutting-edge ROVs, remote camera systems, and a whole range of different equipment, which really places SAIAB at the cutting edge of coastal ichthyology. And this goes along with our biobanks and, of course, the national fish collection that the Smiths started. So I'd just also like to thank both the NRF executive, but also the DSI for really tremendous ongoing support for marine science. South Africa is facing a few challenges on aspects such as electricity and things, but really this is a beacon of where the South African government has really put a lot of effort and funds into driving marine science. I'm going to now be introducing our first speaker, and that is Dr. Peter Samavakis. Peter has very kindly done the foreword to the 5 volumes, and he is a research associate of the Institute. He's an internationally recognized ichthyologist working on taxonomy and biodiversity as part of the global EAF Nansen program, which is headed up by the FAO. He's the author of numerous scientific articles and has described many new fish species to science, as well as producing a number of FAO species identification guides. As I said, he works very closely with SAIAB as a research associate, spends a lot of time in our collections, and I think it's very opportune to have Dave, to have Peter kick off and give us our first snapshot and bite at the Smith Memorial Lecture. So over to you, Peter.
So, good evening to everyone. I don't know if you can see my screen, if I can have confirmation.
It's all good, Peter, if you can possibly put it onto presentation mode.
Okay.
There, that's good. You're good.
Is it good now?
Go. Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, so once again, good evening to everyone. My name is Peter Samavakis, and I am based, I work for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and I'm based at FAO headquarters in Rome. I'm also affiliated to SAIAB, and I hold a research associate position for ecology. And so thank you, Angus, for the presentation. As reflected in the title of my presentation, I thought that the best way to highlight the scientific importance of this extraordinary publication was to make some practical examples of its relevance for my work within the program. So for this scope, I have prepared a few slides to briefly introduce the E.F. Nansen program to this forum. The E.F. Nansen program is executed by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in close collaboration with the Institute of Marine Research, IMR, in Bergen, Norway, and it's funded by the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, NORAD. The program supports partner countries and fishery-regional organizations in Africa and the Bay of Bengal to improve their capacity for sustainable management of their fisheries and other uses of marine coastal resources through the implementation of the ecosystem approach to fisheries. The program initiated in 1975 with the aim of studying fishery resources in poorly known oceans. The Nansen program through time has evolved in response to challenges and emerging issues for sustainability of marine resources and ecosystem. Today, the E.F. Nansen program addresses the multiple dimensions of food security by recognizing emergency threats such as impacts of climate change and marine pollution, while focusing on governance and capacity issues that still hamper sustainable use of the oceans in many parts of the world. The program is built around three areas of work: science, capacity development, and fishery management. I'm involved in the science and capacity development components of the program. Specifically, I participate as reference taxonomist in selected surveys. I prepare species identification guides, and I contribute with taxonomic articles to the scientific output of the program. And I also run taxonomy courses at regional and the national level. The program is committed to meeting several UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, and it was recently endorsed as key contributor to the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development 2021-2030. So it is important to highlight the relevance of coastal fisheries of the Western Indian Ocean for the FAO-EF Nansen program, and the relevance can be summarized as follows. For the science component, it facilitates improved reporting of catch data from surveys in the region. Also, it makes available new baseline knowledge for the production of country-level FAO species identification guides in the region. And also its application can contribute to improved understanding of specific identity and distribution of exploited and associated species. While for the capacity development component of the program, coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean represents a very much needed new and innovative tool for taxonomy training. So just to show how coastal fishes of Western Indian Ocean is relevant for each of these areas of work of the program. In these slides, we will go a little bit more in detail. For the surveys component of the program, the coastal fishes of Western Indian Ocean fills a long-standing gap as existing reference publications for the regions, such as the FAO Western Indian Ocean species identification sheets published in 1984, as well as the SAIAB sweet sea fishes published in 1986, are outdated in terms of nomenclature and species coverage. Also, it makes available key information on new species descriptions that are usually published in a large variety of specialized scientific journals, which are usually unavailable to the non-expert user. Lastly, it provides a new tool with innovative elements for hands-on training of local scientists participating in surveys on board the research vessel, Dr. Fridtjof Nansen. Passing on to another important component of the program, that is to say the production of FAO species identification guides. The coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean is relevant because the systematic accounts, the scientific illustrations, sketches of diagnostic features produced for the coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean represent a valuable pool of novel scientific information and artwork that is usable for future publications, including the FAO guides. Also, the identities and distributions of several fish species in the region are still inaccurately understood and reported in the literature. Coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean contribute to remove ambiguity within the literature, not only updating distribution and species coverage, but also providing expanded descriptions of species, including characters that are not covered in previous works. Lastly, coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean has the important role to spread and consolidate important changes in the classification scheme of fishes, deriving from notable advances in our knowledge of the phylogenetic relationships of bony and cartilaginous fishes in recent years. So now passing on to the science and taxonomy component of the program. It is important to say that the science plan of the program addresses overall principles and main thematic areas for the research of the E.F. Nansen, which includes the use of the Dr. Fridtjof Nansen as a key tool for field work, taxonomy work, including the description, the discovery and formal description of new species to science is high in the rank of scientific output of the program. Here, as per the new species descriptions, I need to give you some background information because it involves science in first place. Because as per the new species, fish species discoveries on the Nansen survey, the Western Indian Ocean has the highest number of new species, exactly 29, followed by the Eastern Indian Ocean with 24 species and the Eastern Atlantic with only 4 species. Now, what I want to highlight here is that 18 out of the 29 new species described and discovered on the Nansen surveys in the Western Indian Ocean have been described by SAIAB taxonomists in the last 3 decades. This was just some background information to this component that I thought it was important to share with you. With regard to the relevance of coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean for this area of work of the program, firstly, it must be said that many species described in the last 4 decades are not recognized in fishery statistics and have not been recorded in the surveys, and also at landing sites because identification sources were unavailable or outdated for the region. Also, the advance in our knowledge of the regional ichthyofauna will facilitate the discrimination of new species found by the program. And lastly, the biodiversity mapping, monitoring, and exploration work of the program is likely to receive great impulse from the coastal fishes of Western Indian Ocean, as quality of the catch data obtained from the surveys is likely to improve. That is to say, we are expecting less misidentifications and higher percentage of species identified to species level. Moving on to the capacity development work area of the program, the coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean is relevant because it provides a great innovation that has never been available in any other guide of this kind. That is to say, an ordinal level key, which is very important to assist the non-expert user in the complex task of keying out an identified specimen. We see, and here I have a concrete example from our experience, that in our taxonomy courses, participants have difficulties in allocating an unknown species in the correct order or family without guidance of the dichotomous key. As I said, these keys are not available at this level, order and family for bony fishes, both in the FAO regional guides as well as in part for the mid-sea fishes. So in my opinion, this is the most important innovation that coastal fishes of the Western Indian Oceans brings to the scientific community. Also important is for this area of work is the coverage of nearly all species with color photographs in live, fresh condition, or colored scientific illustrations, which are of great usefulness to the non-expert user, who finds the black and white illustrations or line drawings, which are commonly used in the FAO regional guides, more difficult to apply for the purpose of species identification. And lastly, the color morphs of some species, as well as juvenile color patterns, are very useful, especially to identify those species where juveniles are strikingly different from adult colorations. One example above all is the many species within the grunts, the family Hemulidae. It is also useful to see the relevance that the coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean book has for sustainable fisheries. In a scenario of climate change and global impacts on fish population, it is important that fishery resources are managed according to an ecosystem approach to fisheries. The principles of EAF are all embedded within the Code of Conduct of Responsible Fisheries, and its importance is highlighted in the recent Blue Transformation Initiative of FAO. In this context, coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean can contribute to contrasting the following drawbacks, which are affecting the regional ichthyofauna. That is to say that the current marine biodiversity research and research efforts are inadequate and or unequal across the region. And this despite that the Western Indian Ocean is home to about 20% of the world's marine fish fauna. In second place, according to a recent IUCN assessment, the Western Indian Ocean has the highest level of uncertainty in species conservation status, 19.9% species assessed as data deficient. And lastly, another important issue reported by the 2021 IUCN assessment paper is that fundamental biological and ecological information to quantify trends in the population status of species occurring in the region is lacking. And this condition may hamper the progress towards international targets for biodiversity conservation, such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the strategic plan for the conservation on biological diversity.
1 minute.
Connected, yes, connected to the previous slides, you can see that the level of species identification is unequal across the region in these plots. Some states like Seychelles report their catch almost entirely to species level, whereas others like Mozambique report less than 10% of their catch to species level. So differences are, it has to be that said also that differences are in part influenced by target resources of a given country. Like example, Seychelles, Maldives are dominated by pelagic fisheries, which have a reduced number of species. In the second plot, we can see that at the regional level, the average percentage of species level catches is around 50% and has remained stable in time, whereas the number of species reported to FAO has grown from less than 50 in the 1970s to almost 200 in 2015. And this is my last slide. This is of general significance for the guides. So why are relevant? Why are they relevant? So identification guides are essential tools as they represent the translation of taxonomic knowledge into practical tools that can be used by a wide array of users, such as students, scientists, fishery observers, and also anglers. It is important to remember that taxonomy is the foundation that underpins our knowledge of all life sciences. Without taxonomy, we would have no measure of diversity of life on this planet or the species richness of different ecosystems, making most aspects of zoology, as well as any kind of conservation priority, virtually impossible to study. It is important to stress that identification guides can strongly contribute to improving the quality of fishery data in countries, regions where the percentage of catches reported to species level is still too low. They are also extraordinary, powerful tools for improving biodiversity mapping, monitoring, and exploration, a requirement that has become of vital importance in the present scenario of climate change and global impacts on fishery resources and marine ecosystems. So I'm taking the opportunity to thank SAIAB's director, Dr. Angus Patterson, and the editorial team of the Coastal Fishes of the Western Indian Ocean for giving me this opportunity to write the foreword for this exceptionally important publication. I want to tell you that this is a great honor for me to have taken this responsibility. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you very much, Peter. When you want to get a taxonomic book introduced, get a taxonomist to do it. I think Peter gives across very clearly the excitement and the need for the book. And taxonomists are generally not known for keeping to time. Wouter, if you can try and keep to time, but really we now hand over to two of the editors. I think this is an opportune time for me to mention that I get a bit choked up, but unfortunately not all of the editors live to see the fruits of their hard work. And tonight I think we must really think of both Phil Heemstra as well as Jack Randall, two giants in the world of fish taxonomy. Many of their families are here tonight watching, just to know that we're thinking of Phil and Jack, but I'll hand over now to Wouter to tell you how we ended up with this book. Wouter, you've got to go to share screen.
Oh, Wesley does. Okay, am I clear?
You're on screen, Wouter, and live globally.
Thank you.
Can you see your screen?
And you've got to share screen now, Votes.
Yes.
There we are. Got it.
There we go. You're good.
Okay.
Wouter. Off you go.
Well, greetings to everybody. It's wonderful to see so many familiar names, participants, people to share in this thing. So, coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean deals us with, as many of you know, with the biodiversity of such fishes of the largest extent of ocean that a work like this has ever been produced for, stretching from the Red Sea
Just ask Wesley, can you make it move? How do I make the next one come up?
How do I make the next one come? Oh, okay, there.
Okay.
Oh, now we got it work. Okay. Right, stretching from the Red Sea down to Cape Point and across to Kanyakumari, which is the southernmost point of India, and then down here, eventually to St. Paul and Amsterdam Islands. This area is part of the Indo-Pacific, a vast extent of ocean from the east coast of Africa to as far east as Easter Island in the Eastern Pacific. The temperate and tropical marine organisms, fishes in particular, of this reason are more closely related to each other than to species in the Mediterranean, Atlantic, Caribbean, or Eastern Pacific. By coastal fishes, we mean species that are generally found in water of 200 to 230 meters depth, and includes deeper water species that migrate to shallower depths at night to feed. As I was thinking about what to say about this project that has taken so very, very long to come to fruition, the word connections kept on coming into my head. The community of fish taxonomists is not very large, and one can divide them first into those involved in freshwater fishes and those whose interests lie in marine fishes. And then one can divide the marine fish community into specialists and generalists. So, specialists like who focus on a particular group of fishes, like Dave Smith, most of the eels.
No, this one. Okay.
There's Helen Larson, the Goby Queen, as she's known as. Rick Winterbottom, who has specialized in a single genus of very little gobies, and for which he and his colleagues have described something like more than 70 species over the past years, and there are some 45 to go. And then you have broad generalists like Jack Randall and Phil Heemstra and many others. Because this community is so small, its members are all pretty closely connected. We kind of know each other and what everybody's involved in, because we exchange information, meet at specialist conferences, such as the annual ASH conference in the US and the Indo-Pacific Fish Conference, which is held somewhere in the Indo-Pacific every 4 years. So when Phil joined the J.L.B. Smith Institute in 1978, came with connections to many marine fish taxonomists from around the world. And it was not long after his arrival that an editorial board for the revision of the sea fishes of Southern Africa was formed. J.L.B.'s Sea Fishes of Southern Africa was first published in 1949. Shortly after publication, he was offered the directorship of the Natal Museum in Pietermaritzburg. This he turned down as it would interfere with his plan to complete a similar book for the fishes of the entire Western Indian Ocean, which he said would take him 6 to 10 years to complete. This, of course, never happened. After 5 editions, the last impression of the sea fishes was published in 1970. Now, it's important to note that J.O.B. Smith was the sole author compiler of the sea fishes, with the collaboration, of course, and support of Margaret Smith. Shortly after Phil's appointment in 1978, the concept of revising the sea fishes was to be carried out by Phil and Margaret Smith, changed to inviting specialists in various groups of fishes, their connections, to contribute to a Smith's Sea Fishes. This was published in 1986 and included contributions from some 60 people, taxonomists from around the world, and was edited by Smith and Heemstra. Now, between the publication of Smith's Sea Fishes and the death of Margaret Smith in 1987, Professor Mike Bruton, then director of the J.B. Smith Institute of Ichthyology, Margaret and Phil held informal discussions on the feasibility of reviving J.B. Smith's 1949 idea of a book covering the marine fishes of the Western Indian Ocean. I suspect there was some encouragement from Jack Randall, who had visited the Institute as a John S. Schlesinger Fellow way back in 1977. It was, however, not until 1995, when Dr. Paul Skelton became director of the Institute, that the notion got plodded along. By 2008, a small number of manuscripts had been submitted to Phil Heemstra. For me and my involvement in this book, connections go way back to 1974, when I was a third-year student at Rhodes, and a newly appointed lecturer in ichthyology, Rick Winterbottom, gave a course in fish taxonomy and systematics. At that time, too, the building in which the Institute is now housed was being built. And after my honors at Rhodes in 1975, the MEMSA, as Margaret Smith had become known, beckoned and employed me on soft money for 2 years to help equip the new building. It was during this time that I became interested in fish taxonomy and participated in my very first collecting trip with Rick and others to Sodwana Bay. In 1979, I attended the first time an ASH conference in the US, in Maine. Before the conference, I spent some time at the Smithsonian Institution, where I met Vic Springer, Jeff Williams down at the bottom there, and Rich Vari, all of who eventually became contributors to the book. I also visited the Academy in Philadelphia and met Bill Smith-Vainers, who became another contributor, had a brief stay in New York, and met Lynn Parenti at the American Museum of Natural History, who eventually became a contributor to this work as well. 20 years later, in 1999, I joined the Institute as a research associate. And in about 2006, and I can't quite remember exactly, Paul Skelton approached me to take over the coordination of the Western Indian Ocean Fisheries Project, as Phil Heemstra was still very involved in writing accounts for the book. One of the hurdles to overcome was who was to be responsible for the cartilaginous fishes. Leonard Campagno, who'd been at the Institute and had moved to the South African Museum, had much on his plate already, was unwilling to commit to such a project. Dave Ebert, originally a student of Leonard's and who completed his PhD at the J.B. Smith Institute, then agreed to coordinate the entire Chondrichthian section, and he will be talking to you about this shortly. Over time, a number of contributors also came to the Institute to work on aspects of the book. Kate Moots came from Guam. Danny Hensley came from Puerto Rico. Xuanxing Ho came from Taiwan. And Walter Evanshoff from Australia. Viblain came from Norway. And so the project gathered momentum. By 2014, most of the manuscripts had been submitted. Now, I think you will understand that that little word coordination is a little bit like herding cats. It was not merely getting 300 odd manuscripts to be submitted by 100 different contributors from around the world, most very busy with their own research programs, but having the text edited to an appropriate format, returning the text to the authors to be vetted, often several times, because the format of the diagnoses of species not all identical, and gathering suitable illustrations for 2,400 odd species that are covered by this book. Illustrations, the field of Elaine Heemstra, for many years specialist illustrator at the Institute. Nearly all species are illustrated, as Peter noted, some with only black and white photographs, drawings, many in color, either as a photograph or as one of Elaine's composites she had rendered in color. Then there were illustrations in keys, illustrations of tooth patterns, of scale patterns, of paw patterns, of peanut head spines and more. Eventually, about 7,000 illustrations had to be sourced, many from authors or from drawings by earlier SAIAB illustrators, drawn or painted by Elaine. Authors were very generous with illustrations, particularly Jack Randall, who over many years, decades, had built up an unmatched collection of photographs of Indo-Pacific fishes in particular. Many other photographers were similarly generous and with allowing us to include their photographs in the book. Photographers from Norway, Taiwan, India, Russia, Japan, France, Malta, and of course from South Africa. Where we had to source illustrations from societies, journals, books, we had to have copyright permission to use them, often at a cost. The process of ensuring we had legal and other permission to use every illustration was in itself a very time-consuming matter. And the proofreading was endless. 2,670 final pages of text, black and white drawings, 667 color plates, proofreading by the editors, by the authors, by a dedicated proofreader, and corrections after each time were checked and checked and checked until the final laid out copy was read for the last time. Now, despite all this work over the past more than 20 years, and Peter has alluded to this, reality is that such a work is soon out of date, because new species are continually being described, and as our understanding of the interrelationships, groups of fishes changes. However, a work like this has two singular advantages. The first is the enormous amount of information that has been made accessible in a single publication, and that will be available online and in print form. We're also working on a way in which the online version can be updated when necessary. The second reason is that the composition of this book focused the attention of many taxonomists on the Western Indian Ocean, resulting in the description of some 80 new species from this area in just the years 2017, 2020, 21. But perhaps the most valuable contribution of this endeavor is that it has laid bare the gaps in our knowledge of the biodiversity of the Western Indian Ocean fishes, with the potential of opening up exciting new fields of endeavor for future, shall we call them biodiversity detectives, rather than merely just taxonomists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wouter. Yeah, again, I don't think anyone must walk away from the contribution or walk away from the understanding of the contribution that Wouter made in pulling this together. As I said, the team got a little smaller with the passing of both Jack and Phil, and Wouter and Elaine played a very large role in pulling it together at the end. And I think we'll always be indebted to you, Wouter, for such a monumentous piece of work, and of course to Elaine for all her illustrations, but just so much more. Elaine is not a fish illustrator. Elaine is a first-class global fish taxonomist, and I think that will be recognized in this book. Now to go to the shark guy. He's always worth a listen. Dave, you were very senior when I was a very young student. and it's really good to have you here introducing the sharky side of things. So over to you, Dave.
There we go. Thanks. Thanks, Angus. Glad to be here. This has been quite a journey for all of us, but it was, for me, it was very, very special because I actually first arrived in South Africa in September of 1986, so 36 years ago. So it's been quite an evolution going from first arriving there and never having been to South Africa to now having had the opportunity to contribute to such a monumental piece of work here. It's when I, oops, hang on. Let me, sorry, just a sec. When I first arrived in South Africa, I was at what was then the JLB Smith Institute, and I had the very good fortune of that. My first Christmas here, I actually ended up house sitting for Margaret Smith and her sister Flora, and it was quite an interesting experience for me because every night Margaret and her sister would come over and bring tea and crumpets. We'd sit there and talk for an hour or so, and she'd share stories about her and JLB and some of the different places and locations they'd traveled to back in the 30s and 40s, especially in the 50s. I heard about the coelacanth story firsthand, and obviously, and Margaret and her sister Flora were quite interesting to watch their interaction with. And as it turned out, that was Margaret's last Christmas with us. She passed away the following September, but it was always one of those things that was very special for me to have that opportunity. And now, as Voter and Angus mentioned, I'm the shark guy. I worked on the sharks, and I also showed up at an interesting time when South Africa was kind of transitioning from sort of some of the pioneers, the real explorers in the field of shark research. And these were people like John Bass and John Wallace, Butch Hulley, Nat Kistasamy, and Jeanette Daubry, who in the late 50s, 60s, and early 70s really kind of brought sharks and rays in the Western Indian Ocean and Southern Africa to the forefront with some of the pioneering work that they did at that time. And at that time, as they were sort of moving on to other facets of their life, myself and a couple of kids here, you might recognize Leonard Campagna, who is my advisor, and Paul Calley, who kind of came onto the scene and started the Shark Research Center at JLB Smith. And that's when we kind of went on to the next phase of really starting to work on sharks and rays in Southern Africa and in the Western Indian Ocean. And for me, it's been, as I say, this long journey. And not only have had an opportunity to work with people like Leonard, and of course, getting to know people like Phil Heemstra and Elaine, Paul Skelton, Tony Ribick, and Mike Bruton, and many others at that time. My long-term continued interest and just my passion I've had developed for Africa, and I've always felt like South Africa is sort of my second home country. But having been able to travel around there, I've had an opportunity to meet like a whole new younger generation of people working in the Western Indian Ocean here. And a lot of what I've been doing through the Food and Agriculture Organization and through the Wildlife Conservation Society and others has been able to go to a lot of different countries and to work with young people there and help them develop skills in identification, which is very important for developing national plans of action for sharks and rays. And another really kind of a cool aspect of this whole thing was that I had in addition to working with the young people in Africa, was to be able to involve several of my students, my graduate students at Moss Landing, that contributed to chapters to this whole process. And to give you an idea how long it's been, is when these young kids here were all doing their masters with me. It's Kelsey James in the upper left corner, below her is Megan Witten, Jenny Kemper in the lower right, and James Nucky in the upper right. They were all doing their masters at the time. Now three of them have gone on and got their PhDs and have all gone on to very successful careers during their time. Now, the important thing that Peter and Voter touched on, why it's important to have identification guides like this, is because when you talk to people, oftentimes they think about sharks, they tend to think of one species, and that's the great white shark. And so people tend to think like, well, they don't realize that globally there's over 1,250 species of sharks. when you speak to people. And one of the interesting things, just to think how far it comes, when I first started there, we knew really nothing about white sharks. Now, if you flip on almost any TV show, you'll see white sharks breaching, flying in the air, and doing all kinds of things. And we've actually learned quite a bit about them. And South Africa was the first country in the world to actually develop a conservation plan policy for white sharks back in 1990 and 1991, when I was still a PhD student. It was kind of a very exciting time to be involved in something like that, because at that time there was no field of conservation, and to be protecting a shark, especially a white shark, was almost unheard of at the time. But the really cool thing is that even though white sharks are kind of big and impressive to see, people don't realize that, like, South Africa and even the Western Indian Ocean in general is really one of the most diverse areas in the world for sharks and rays. You have things like this striped pajama shark, which is endemic to South Africa, but it's one of many species of little cat sharks that are endemic all throughout the Western Indian Ocean. And if you happen to catch the movie last year, My Octopus Teacher, this was really the star of the show. And really, and spoiler alert, that pajama sharks actually like to eat octopus. So, but in addition to just think in some of the variety of colors and different endemicity with sharks throughout the region, sharks also have a lot of unique adaptations. This is a tail-like dogfish, which actually Butch Hulley had described as not only as a new shark, but as a new genus back in 1966. And this little shark, which was originally discovered off Cape Town, has glands that near its cloaca that secretes a bioluminescence, which would make sense for this. In one hand, that thing lives deep in the ocean, but also at the same time, we don't really know. We've only known the shark from 4 specimens. We have no idea like how it really interacts within its environment. But it's just an example of different diversity and behavior that a lot of these sharks have. You have something like the 6-gill saw shark. Now, which is mostly endemic to South Africa, but also into southern Mozambique. Most sharks have 5 gill slits on each side of their head, but there's a few species, the 6 and 7 gill sharks and the 6-gill saw shark, that have 6 or 7. The saw shark just has 6. Now, when I started this project, when I first came on board in late 2009, early 2010, the 6-gill saw shark was only known to be one species, Plioturima warreni. Well, in the intervening years, and in fact, in the past couple of years, we now know that this actually represents 3 distinct species, not only a species that occurs off South Africa and southern Mozambique, but there's also an endemic species that occurs off Madagascar, and another one that we know from off Kenya. And so the species actually we thought was one species is now 3. And again, this is the importance of having something like identification guides, so people can recognize, learn to recognize the individual species, and in case they might recognize something like this there's more than one species involved. Now, when I talk about sharks, what I also references are what are called the flat sharks, or the rays and the skates. And I reference them frequently as flat sharks when I speak to general audiences, because really rays and skates are, if you take a shark and you flatten it and you rotate the gills underneath the head, that's really what a ray is. And I find that if you get people's interest, if I talk about a ray or skate, most people kind of look at it like, okay, that's kind of interesting. But if I talk about flat sharks, people get interested because it is a shark and they are related. And so these are types of things that I try to promote when I speak, to get people not just interested in the sharks, but in the rays, because the rays globally are actually a far more diverse group. And you also have this other group here that's also united by their cartilaginous skeleton, and that are the ghost sharks. And the ghost sharks are a much smaller group. There's only about 52 species in the order, but in the Western Indian Ocean, you have 13 species. About a quarter of all the known ghost sharks occur in the Western Indian Ocean. Now, I frequently get a question like, well, gosh, we got so many species of sharks, we didn't realize you had over 1,250 species. And people think like, have you described all the species of sharks known? And the answer is no. And you look at this chart here, between 1758 and 1899, in over 141-year period, we averaged about 3 new species a year, 3 new species of sharks. Now, this is globally, and then between 1900 and 1979, we we averaged about 5 new species a year, which is about 429 species were described. But in the past 40 years, we've been averaging over 11 new species of sharks a year. Now, to put that in perspective of where the Western Indian Ocean comes into play, is that just since 2010, when I really got involved in this project, there's been 171 new species of sharks. And when I say, again, sharks, I'm talking about flat sharks and ghost sharks that have been described. And of this 171, 25% of these 25% of these occurred in the Western Indian Ocean. So there actually has been, globally, the Western Indian Ocean has contributed one of the most diverse areas of sharks anywhere. In fact, since 2017, there's been 65 sharks described globally. 35% have come just from the Western Indian Ocean. And even to take that number even down lower, since 2020, since the pandemic began, there's been a total of 21 shark species described, of which 8 of them came from the Western Indian Ocean. So rather than slowing down, we're actually still finding more new species throughout the Western Indian Ocean. So you might think like, okay, Dave, that's kind of cool that we're describing all these new species, but why is that important? Well, it's important because of something like this. This is the Honeycomb Cat Shark. This species hasn't been seen. It was very common off southern Mozambique and South Africa in the 50s and 60s. We haven't seen this thing since 1972. It was not officially named until 2006, 34 years after it disappeared. And this particular shark was named by one of the contributors, Dr. Brett Heumann, who did his PhD at the University of Cape Town. Sadly, Brett passed away about 10 years ago and it was obviously not here to see the completion of this project. But this is the type of thing why it's important that we able to address these things, and having identification guides like this, like the coastal fishes of the Western Indian Ocean, is vitally important. You have other species like the speckled cat shark. There's another species that was named in 1972 by John Bass and Jeanette Daubry and Nat Kisnasamy, but we haven't seen this species since 1991. And finally, just the third example is the Pondicherry shark, which is from India and Sri Lanka and that part of the world, that was named and discovered in 1839. We haven't seen this shark since the 1970s. There's a good possibility that this shark might even be extinct at this point in time. So that's some of the importance, because that these sharks, we really understand what these sharks are about, because these sharks that may be missing and disappearing without recognizing them, these are the proverbial canaries in the coal mine, and might be telling us a lot about what's happening in the world around us. And I've seen a lot of these changes just in my 36 years of having spent time in Africa, South Africa, Southern Africa, and the Western Indian Ocean. And to give you a few examples of some of the more recent species that we've described, this is just in the past year. These are 4 species that have just been named from the Western Indian Ocean. You have in the upper right-hand corner, you have a new species of eagle ray, the Wafikis eagle ray, which came from the Persian Gulf area. You have in the upper left corner, you have a Crota striped guitarfish. You have down in the lower right there the Malagasy guitarfish, and then you have in the lower left corner there your Manchurian's cat shark, deep sea cat shark. These are all things that we've just have been named within the past year. And a 5th species that we have that was recently named, and some many of you may have known, was Barry Rose. We also named as new species of shark after Barry's lantern shark. That was a species that we find that's mostly found just in South Africa and in Mozambique. Again, it's one of these species that a lot of these sharks tend to have a high degree of diversity within their area. And another species I'd just like to share is this one that was just described in 2019. This was originally based on a specimen that Elaine Heemstra showed me in the collection at SAIAB. And it turned out this was a species that was collected by Phil Heemstra back in 1980 on a Nansen survey that Peter spoke about earlier. Well, this particular skate was only known from one single specimen from the one that Phil collected until literally 3 weeks ago. I got this photograph from a colleague in Kenya. He couldn't figure out what species of skate this was. And here we have This is now the second record of a lane skate from Kenya, which is kind of good to know this thing is still around. At least, fortunately, it was being caught in a fishery there. But what part of the reason we named this thing is that I named this one after Elaine, is that she's contributed an immense amount of illustrations and knowledge to the Western Indian Ocean. She did a tremendous amount of work. Really was one of the drivers to help get this book through. And why Phil, who I knew very well, had a couple of sharks and rays named after him. I thought it was time that Elaine receive an honor, and this was sort of my way of thanking her for all of her contribution that she's made to the fishes of the Western Indian Ocean. And with that, I just will get off the stage here and thank everyone for for inviting me here for SAIAB, and thanks for all my friends that I've known for many years and decades now, and thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Dave. Yeah, also a honorary curator at SAIAB and a firm friend. It's really nice to watch the chat as well, to see so many friends of both JLB Smith and SAIAB chatting in the group. I think you've all realized just quite how long this has taken and how much work it has gone in, and really it's up to me to thank all the authors for their patience, to specifically thank the editors, and that's Phil and Elaine Heemstra, Jack Randall, Dave Ebert, and Wouter Holleman, for their not hours of work, not days of work, not months of work, but years of work that have gone into this book. There's also important other people. Dennis Pollack played a very important role as one of the early donors in the book. Thanks to Dennis for putting in some much needed money around about 12 years ago. We will definitely be coming to visit with a box set for you. Yeah, thanks very much, Dennis. Then it gets to the proofreaders, and I know that I'm going to forget some people, but people like Jenny Gon, who endlessly read through and dotted all the T's and crossed all the I's. The typesetters, I think Elizabeth Gowans had to leave because of load shedding, but Elizabeth Gowans and also Cindy Kulendowski, who played a major role in typesetting of the whole document. We then got to thank the ink design team in Cape Town, Julie Farquhar. Julie and the team did an amazing book. More than putting the book together, I think the patience that they showed dealing with us was amazing. Anyone wants to produce a book, I'm giving a shout out to Ink Design in Cape Town. They really are the next level. There's also people that provided much needed advice, people like Mike Schramm from NISC, who took a young director through the concept of developing a book, which wasn't one book, but was 5 volumes. So really, there's a lot of people to have thanked to get this to where it is. One of the key things that I think is important was in 1986, which was my first year at university, Smith Sea Fishers came out. All of the friends in my digs when I turned 21 all contributed and bought me a book, and it took about 10 of them to buy the book. And that's why I think it's so important that we have both a print version, which we will sell, but also the online version. This book is not for South Africa. It's not for the globe. It's actually really for all the nations in the Western Indian Ocean, and in particular, all the students that will come over the years who will cut their teeth on this book or volume of books. So I'm very pleased that we've managed to put it online, that it will go out there. We will be giving numerous digital copies out at the WIOMSA conference, which is the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association conference in Gqeberha next week or the week after. And really what we want is for this book to go out to everyone in the Western Indian Ocean so that we can sustainably grow our blue economy, and most important, look after our Western Indian Ocean books. So to the students, yes, you're going to have to save up if you want a hard copy version, but luckily we're in a different era to 1986, and you'll be able to download a copy from the SAIAB website. We are going to open up to a number of questions, question and answer sessions. So if you want to put some of the questions either in the chat or the question and answer box, and then I'll be able to put them onto the onto Dave, Peter, Wouter, in terms of answering there. First question is from Dennis Pollock, and that would go to Dave Ebert. Dave, what's the name of the shark of Elaine's Ray? You need to come off mute.
Yeah, I was just going to type in, it's Leucoraja elaini.
There we go. Well deserved, Elaine. There's a question from Maloksi Shabalala regarding Operation Pakisa and whether it also supports aquatic farming. Yes, just get hold of me afterwards. There's a large sector of Operation Pakisa that speaks specifically to the whole aquaculture industry. Alan Whitfield, where to now from the Western Indian Ocean book? Well, I'm not going to ask Wouter because I think he will have a cadenza. No, I think the idea is that the era of single volume or multiple volume books like this is going to be very hard to replicate. We intend to take a breather for the next 3 months, and then in the new year, look at how we can have an online version that will be able to update according to family, but also link in where the new papers come in. I know that Dennis Pollock is a very avid database person. So there's a whole range of options that we're going to look into next year, Alan, in terms of taking the book into something that's more Wikipedia type or something that we'll be able to update already. As Dave said, just in the last few years during COVID times, there's a whole bunch more species to put in. So we will be doing that. The other aspect is that we've got a cohort of our own students that are coming through with their PhDs in taxonomy, people like Yonela and Tonelo, and we'll be looking to them to be driving this forward in the future. And of course, most importantly, what we'll be doing is taking the book to the Western Indian Ocean nations with the Department of Science and Innovation. And also the next step as well is working a lot on the biobanking, Alan, to make sure that we start getting all the genetic samples as well as the wet samples. So that's a long answer to a short question, but it's just the start in terms of where we go with the renewed emphasis on fishes of the Western Indian Ocean. And I know that Peter's looking forward to investing lots of money from the Nansen project. Thank you very much, Peter. Yeah, it's a start. Any more questions? Sean Fennessy says that Elania looks like Pulopunctatus muralitus. I don't know if that's true or whether Sean's just giving you a hard time, Dave. You're on mute again.
I think he's just giving me a hard time right now because Pulopunctatus is in a genus Dipterus and Muralitus in the genus Raja, and that's a Leucoraja. So. Okay,
so it's just the Ori guys having fun with us. I'd like to note that I'm an estuarine ecologist, not a shark specialist. Any other questions in the chat or comments? There's obviously been Lucky, who's done a sterling job, Lucky Dlamini and Wesley before was briefed that I should read out some of the comments. But I think we're on about comment 340, so we won't get through the comments. Other than to say, I think it's been a wonderful evening of people touching base and really bringing a focus to fishes of the Western Indian Ocean. And we will definitely be working with all of our colleagues further north to make sure that make sure the book is distributed, but to carry on building on collaborations going forward. I was lucky enough to be in Kenya last week and had a discussion with the Heemstra team, and they're very keen to work with us, as well as the DG of the Kenyan fisheries. So we'll definitely be making sure that this gets out to the Western Indian Ocean. But that's also a job for all of you. You guys have all got contacts, and it's up to you to also spread the word as to where it is, and also be agents for change for fishers of the Western Indian Ocean. Are there any other questions? I like to see the fact that we've had a lot of people hang on. We're about 20 minutes over, but it's really good to see that people have stuck around. And I'd just like to thank everyone. And I'd like to hand over to Clifford Normani. Clifford is also a PhD graduate from the Institute and studied when I was here. So we've got lots of ex-PhD students and old JLB Smith folks. So I think it's very opportune for Clifford as the Deputy CEO of the NRF to close for the evening.
Thank you, Angus, and thank you to each one of the speakers, the keynote speakers, that reflected on their journey of this entire process that have been made by very different people. Some perhaps that it may not have been possible to list in all the acknowledgements that have been made here, by different people. What is so clear here is that it is not possible to do work of this scale without the effective collaboration, dedication, and commitment of very many people who, to a fundamental work of this nature. So we'd like to thank to each and everyone, but also not to forget the families that have seminal contributions. So on behalf of the National Research Foundation and SAIAB itself and the South African, marine science community, the community in the continent. So I think work of this nature creates a wonderful and fundamental foundation onto which many others can build, particularly, the young people that we are seeking to grow and mold into excellent scientists to the level of the people who've been the main contributors in this work. So I'd like to thank everyone once more, and everyone that's been responsible for organizing and connecting and coordinating.
Thanks very much, Cliff. Yeah, and I think that's the evening. I'd just like to
all of the activity, everybody, and may everyone go well.
Sorry, Cliff, I thought you'd finished, but thanks very much, Clifford. Indeed, a big effort by hundreds of people. And once again, I still think that the glory must really go to all the authors, and in particular the editors. And to finish off and just say that I think of Phil Heemstra this evening and Jack Randall, and their wonderful contribution to Western Indian Ocean ichthyology. Good night.
Good night, everyone.